When you reach out to folks for interviews about Killer Instinct, enthusiasm abounds, and you usually find yourself with so much extra content that you just don't know quite what to do with it. This was the case with Killer Sounds, and outside of the 4 hours I chatted with Mick Gordon about seasons 1 and 2 of KI, everyone had so much to add about the making of those soundtracks that I decided to make a second video on it. This video is less of a documentary and more of a behind-the-music type deal, so sit back and relax and let's learn more about some select tracks from seasons 1 and 2 of Killer Instinct.
I knew when this job came about that I would have to redo the theme at some point, and it filled me with dread at that point. I remember that was my second thought after reading Jago. The second thought was like, oh shit, I'm going to have to redo this theme. I loved the original Killer Instinct theme. It just sounded like the future when I was a kid, right? It was just like the biggest thing. It was like the best thing. It had this like cool melody and these awesome guitar tones, and trying to match that or doing something with it, oh man, it fills you with dread, honestly. I definitely do not go into that with any level of confidence, right? What I figure I do, I might even try and find some of the old versions because they are terrible and I don't mind sharing how terrible they are. We tried these like emo-y versions. Which is very clearly a End of the Heartache ripoff. But anyway, so we went from that. We tried these sort of things. What's this one? I mean, that was like the 30 Seconds to Mars version that we did. I'm telling you, man, these are bad. They're not great. They're not good. I started like trying to think about like, what do I enjoy about the theme and like what's some of the most iconic parts of it? And obviously the guitar solo, that melody was one of the most important things. Fascinatingly, I was told in the beginning, like on Doom, to avoid guitars on this one. I think they were really worried that it would come out sounding like some sort of like dated thrash metal thing or like a Metallica sort of thing or like some sort of like country thing if you had guitars in it, right? Most people were kind of avoiding guitars in scores at that point. And that's kind of what led to all of those versions. And as frustrating as it is, sometimes it's good to go through that process to realize that they had it right back in the beginning. Robin Beanland had it right. It's meant to be a guitar. That's it. It's not meant to be anything else other than a guitar. And then musically, you just start to identify what makes it interesting. And I remember the original theme starting with the subtle snare drum and the muted guitar part, right? It's really iconic in my mind is that... I started playing around with that rhythm, and that's what led to this these sort of big like drum introduction things where I'm just playing the same rhythm. It's the same rhythm. It's a little bit slower and it's on drums, but it's the same rhythm. The second thing you hear in there is that anvil. I remember that as being a big part of that Killer Instinct sonic identity was this anvil hitting, right? You can hear it on the snare there. So once you start bringing those in, you're like, you know what? This is starting to feel like Killer Instinct in a little way. And then honestly, I just sort of kept working at it, which I think is like, that's the key to any of this sort of stuff, is just work at it and work at it and work at it some more. I remember this idea of like, you remember the original Killer Instinct, where there was the Ultratech? They were the company that ran the tournament, right? And I remember thinking this idea of like Ultratech's going to be like synthetic and sort of disjointed and have lots of cool sounds. Like I'd imagine that. So I took that same dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun and just went sort of really cyber with it. Right? So again, that's all from that original guitar riff. It's all inspired by that, right? And then, I just kicked into sort of like a bigger, I don't know, more punchy version. And that one, once we got to that point, it started to feel maybe that's going to be it. Like it's a bit more slappy, bit more punchy, bit more groovy, anything like that, those sorts of words, right? And so once I hit that point, it's just a question of polish, and you just polish and polish and polish and polish and polish some more. The part I guess I haven't mentioned here is that Robin Beanland's original theme doesn't use a guitar specifically. It's a synthesizer, but it's a guitar patch on the synthesizer, right? I went looking for one and I couldn't find one, and I went looking for modern patches that sounded similar, and I couldn't find anything there. But there's some really interesting aspects to it, especially like how the harmonics come out that I really tried to match with the modern guitar. Especially on that note there, when that high harmonic comes in, that's just because the synth patch that Robin used in the beginning had that, and my nostalgia said, you need that in there. Just little things like that, man, that you can do to kind of bring it, more Killer Instinct-y. I think looking back on it, this is the one that I'm probably most happy with. It's the one that I most enjoy doing. It's the one that I look back and go, yeah, I'm glad that one turned out the way it did. There was a lot of conversations when we started it about what was going to be. And thankfully at that point, a lot of their internal research had already been done. So they'd already reached out to representatives of the tribe, and we're in contact with them about language and things like that. And Jed had an invitation to do a recording session up in Idaho to capture some great stuff. And I have these incredible photos of Jed out in this like amazing field, and there's horses in the background, and they're there recording the vocals for this theme.
We set it up at the top of a hill. We were facing a lake. It was like all foresty, and there were wild horses that were moving all around. 3 people from the Nez Perce tribe who came with us. We had a native drum, and we already talked with them. They actually helped us to work on the story behind Thunder.
I can't be half in on anything. I'm super obsessive personality. I've got to be all the way in on everything I do. So when coming up with themes, I just immerse myself in the in whatever it is. So for this theme in particular, I went to Yosemite and I did a big hike through Yosemite. I got some incredible cedar flutes to perform the melody of the theme. Jed was doing the vocal recordings off in Idaho, and you just like immerse yourself in it completely. And while I was there in Yosemite, I was recording like trees and rocks and water, and all that stuff ended up becoming like that's literally logs and trees and bits and pieces that are recorded at Yosemite, right? And I know it's like, it can sound a bit like pretentious and fake because you're like, trying to make it authentic. And it's not like that. It's just, if you're there in that environment, absorbing it, you're going to come up with ideas. And when I was immersing myself in all of that sort of stuff, the melody just popped into my head. And it's just one of those things, like you pray for those moments when you're a music producer. You just pray for those moments where something just appears in your head. And literally, I was just walking around one day, and this flute theme, which I will try to find for you. And that's me playing that theme there on one of these cedar flutes. And it literally just sort of popped into my head, and I started hearing that against. And it started to feel interesting. The start of it kind of hints at the Killer Instinct theme, the instinct. It feels a little bit nostalgic. It feels a little bit proud. It feels a little bit sad, but noble. It's just interesting. It just sort of fit the character kind of really well. And honestly, it feels, when these ideas come to you, it feels like that happens because you're immersed in the environment itself. You're just thinking about it on a subconscious level. Every cell in your body is leading you towards those ideas, and it comes to you. You don't make it happen. It comes to you in a way. So once I had that down, I sent it to Jed, and he took it to Idaho, where they recorded some vocals over the top. And this is the raw recording. He had difficulty singing without playing the drum. So Jed had to kind of try and record him with just the vocals without him hitting the drum, because like when you start putting that into the rest of the music, it like timing wise gets a little bit tricky, and I didn't want to mess up his vocals, right? So there was a little bit of that sort of stuff, but it's just beautiful. Like that in itself is part of it, right? You just wouldn't get that if you were in a super safe, sterile recording studio, out in the wilderness. That's what it sounds like. So that's kind of what we got there. I was doing a talk at PAX, and I saw it as an opportunity to have a crowd. And because we had no money and no budget and things like that, I was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I went to PAX and set up some microphones and talked about bringing Killer Instinct back? And Killer Instinct at the time was like, I think only a couple of characters were out at that stage. I don't think Hinnamatoom, who was Thunder, had even come out at that stage. So they were kind of all eager to learn about Killer Instinct. There were some really diehard Killer Instinct fans there with the t-shirts and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, man, wouldn't it be cool to like have them involved with the song somehow, right? So I set up some microphones and I got them to record a little chant that we did. So that's the crowd at PAX. But yeah, it was good. It just added another little element that we could do that didn't cost any money, and all of a sudden we had a crowd, So plus too, like I imagine if I was a fan of the series and I bought my ticket to PAX and I flew all the way down to Melbourne and I saw that there was this talk about Killer Instinct, I was like, oh man, I'm going to go to that. And then I go to the talk, and then, there's a recording session there, and I'm part of this crowd that's chanting. And then when I hear that in the game a few months later, like that's the greatest experience as a gamer, like you're going to have, right? And so I think it's important to acknowledge those in the industry. It's important to give the community those sort of, situations as well, because for them, they'll live with those memories forever, right? That's a really privileged opportunity. on each one of these things, I think this is probably the most important thing that like I had to discover on this project was that each character needed like a single word or a single concept that defined the theme. And it can't just be a werewolf or it can't just be a ninja or whatever. It needs to be something deeper than that, right? With Sabrewulf, it was like this Jekyll and Hyde thing. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if you had like this orchestra? But within the orchestra, there's this werewolf that's sort of starting to appear and he's just like ripping the orchestra apart. So yeah, that's how that kind of came together. All of that stuff was actually a real string quartet. We recorded a real string quartet with that. For that, I've got a couple of these tracks here, which I can quickly pull out. Like these are the cello takes. So that's some of the cello stuff, and there was a viola and 2 violins that we recorded as well. I'll just throw up some of the viola stuff here so you can hear the two together. But it was a real string quartet that we recorded for that. I remember the part that I was most excited about doing was the remake of the original theme. Interesting, this string quartet was recorded not as a quartet. These were recorded as individual musicians by themselves. So normally when you record a string quartet, you record all 4 members together, but we didn't. We recorded each one individually. Again, it was for budget concerns. I actually think, I could be wrong, but I think the same person played the viola, the violin, and the violin too, and there was a different cello player. So I think it was a 2-person string quartet, but some of the stuff turned out so good. I mean, I want that played at my funeral, just like that. I think that'd be great. So Spinal's a really good one to talk about, like what it's like to try and redevelop a theme but still try and capture what makes it interesting in the first place. So not only was Spinal, I feel, a pretty iconic character to the original game. Maybe that's because Spinal's on the front cover of Killer Cuts, who knows, right? But musically, that original Spinal theme is so good, right? It's just to nail the sound of a skeleton, an evil skeleton, it's perfect. And there's certain elements to that. There's this sort of evil brass aspect to it, and there's this xylophone that feels like bones, right? So it was important to know that I was going to have those 2 elements, some sort of brass element and some sort of this bone xylophone sort of thing. Once you identify those 2 things, it's all about like where to introduce new things. Now, the discussions with the developers on this one weren't actually that fruitful because the big thing about pirates at the time was Pirates of the Caribbean. And so when I was talking to the developers about what sort of music they envisioned for the new Spinal, they're like, hey, maybe something like Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, thinking like looking at Spinal, this like evil warlord, resurrected skeleton, I don't picture Jack Sparrow. I don't picture this big swashbuckling sort of music, right? It's not like that. So once you've got that, you start thinking, well, what's important to these guys here? It's the fact that he's a pirate, right? So it's not just a resurrected skeleton. This character is a pirate. What's a pirate? Well, a pirate's something that, you know, cruises around on boats and ships and pillages and steals and whatever, right? So at the time, I was traveling to Sweden to work on another project. And while I was in Sweden, of course, the Viking culture is huge. Vikings, the TV show, was just starting to kick up about that sort of time. And this sort of resurrection of Viking culture was like pretty strong there. And I'm like, Well, Vikings kind of typically share the same qualities as a pirate, right? Boats, traveling around, pillaging. It's kind of the same thing. So what if we make Spinal a Swedish pirate, right? Now, looking into Swedish history and things, there's this real strong aspect of paganism, you know? And what I love about this idea of paganism and things where you have an incantation or like a chant or like a prayer that you sing to summon spirits to help you do things, to summon an evil spirit in battle to help you in battle. And once we hit that idea, like, oh, that could be cool. What if there's like a prayer that Spinal has that, you know, whenever there's warriors that need to summon Spinal to help in battle, they can just sing this prayer and out comes Spinal ready to attack, right? From there, it's just trying to find out like as many cool bits that you can do to get into that. So I reached out to my buddy Pontus, who wrote the lyrics for this track. He's a Swedish guy, and he helped me write these lyrics and then translate it into Swedish. And he joked about Vikings, all they did was eat mushrooms and kill people. And so the third verse in the Spinal track is something about eating mushrooms and killing people in Swedish. So from there, I found a couple of people to help me record a group of Swedish guys in Gothenburg. We got them into this gymnasium and got them to record this cool kind of chant, I guess, that sort of happens throughout the track. Vindarna viner marken skakar, fienden samlas runt vårt rike, redo att kuva oss nu. And it's like, once we put that stuff over this skeleton character, oh man, it was like, there we are. That's it. It kind of feels evil now, right? That feels like it's going to be a thing. Then the challenge became sort of building a track around that. I always feel on any musical project, of course, what we are doing at the end of the day is making music. And so what I do first before anything else is get the notes down, get the feel down. And I always do that with like really crappy sounds, because I feel if you can get the vibe of a song down with crappy sounds, then you're in a good place, right? I knew I wanted this sort of triplety feel, this sort of feel, because it felt like a bony xylophone-y type of thing, and it also throws back to Robin's original theme quite well. I have here the original like synth mock-up. This is how Spinal's theme started. Right? That's it. These original sort of sketches, I guess you'd say. And then that turns into... But the notes are the most important thing. What else can I tell you about this track? Well, it didn't feel like Spinal until I had two things in there. Number one was this bone xylophone that is so integral to Robin's original theme, right? So it took me ages to figure out how to do it. A xylophone doesn't sound like the xylophone that Robin Beanland used. So what I needed to do was find the original sound patch that Robin used. And it has a certain quality to it that feels a lot more like a bone xylophone, like an actual skeleton. It feels like sort of clanky bones, you know what I mean? There's a certain quality to it. Once I put that in there, all of a sudden it started to work. I can show you here a little bit of the track without that xylophone, and then I'll add it in so you can hear the difference. Like, it sounds kind of evil, but the moment you put the bones in there, all of a sudden it started to feel like Spinal. The last little bit that I wanted to add was something a little bit creepy. Being the fact that he's a skeleton, right? I wanted to find something that was kind of a little bit evil and dark, and I don't know, meant something that you'd use to summon a skeleton sort of warlord, right? And I ended up tracking down a Tibetan Kangling It's a little bit creepy. It's a little bit weird. It does freak people out when I bring it out at parties. But a kangling is essentially a flute. It's a bone flute, and it's made from a femur. But it's a very particular femur. It is a human femur. And it's used in death ceremonies in Tibet. I ended up getting a hold of one of these, and I still have it, and I still use it on various different projects. And once I got that and I put it into the beginning of the track, it really just set the deal, right? It just sort of nailed it. I typically, if we have an idea like this, I don't tend to share it. I would rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission, which I know tends to get me into trouble quite a bit. But I feel that I wouldn't have been able to get to this point if I had asked. If I had approached upper management and said, hey, I'm looking at recording a human bone, I don't know. And the moment you ask, if they say no, then you definitely can't do it, right? So anyway, I got a hold of the kangling, and we recorded some kangling. And these are the original recording sounds that we have from the session. As you can hear, it has a very particular quality about it. That is the sound that plays when the round starts. And so it's almost like, they spend the opening of the track summoning the Warlord, and then the Warlord arrives, and the kangling is sounded, and then the battle starts. And there's our narrative, there's our storytelling. The original Killer Instinct track for Orchid, I think it's great, but it is very much of the time. And this is, I guess, something that we're trying to grasp at the moment is like, how do we accept things that were the norm 20 years ago, but certainly aren't the norm now? Like, we have to all acknowledge in ourselves that, yes, we know better now, but at that time, I'm sure any of us would have done the same thing, right? It's just history. That's how things go, right? When you're brought on to bring something back that was from the 90s like this, I think it's important to go like, well, that's cool. We can bring this. That can stay back there. That can stay back in the 90s, right? And so with Orchid, there was this real opportunity to kind of do that really overtly. The original theme from back in the 90s was like, the lyrics were touch me, feel me, right? Like it was just pure objectification. And so this time it's like, no, fuck it, man. It's like, touch me and I'll break your face. Like that was the change. Once we found that is easy. It all just sort of flowed together. The track itself, though, did not come together nice and easily, right? It was a real challenge. So at this point in the project, I'd done the Tiger Lair, which was Jago's theme. I'd done Glacius' theme, and I'd done Sabrewulf's theme, and I'd done a new version of The Instinct, right? So I was starting to earn a little bit of trust. Now, what do I normally do when I earn a bit of trust? I do whatever I can to try and break that, right? It just seemed to be a thing that I tend to do. There was discussions about the level itself, and there was the idea that it was set in a war zone, right? And it was a Siberian war zone. And I was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do have a female vocalist, a female rapper maybe, and maybe a Siberian rapper? That would be kind of interesting, right? But it also needed to be electronic. Now, I'd never done anything like that before. I hadn't even really done the electronic thing that much. I certainly hadn't done any like sort of rap or stuff like that. And I had never worked with any Siberian rap artists before. So starting out on that, it was just not great. It was disaster after disaster after disaster. And I kept trying to tell the developers like, no, this idea will work. We can have electronic music and we can have some sort of rapping thing over the top of it. We can have a big pop chorus. It'll work. Trust me, it'll work. And I just couldn't get them on board. And a big part of why I couldn't get them on board was because I couldn't find a way of illustrating the idea. Like any collaboration, when you're working on a project, it's really important to get the people that you're working with on board with your ideas. And the best way that you can do that is to show them that it's a good idea. idea. And I could not show them. I had a lot of trouble showing them that it was a good idea. It wasn't until I got Ali involved, who kind of bought the voice of Orchid, that things started to actually take shape and come together.
We were already doing music on our own. As for getting involved in video games, our first video game project was with Mick. But you were composing before that. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's always funny when people ask, like, how did you get started in music? You can kind of trace back these moments to when you're a kid watching something that gave you an emotional reaction. And you fast forward several years to someone making you play a really crappy recorder in elementary school. And you fast forward even further, and all of a sudden you're playing in a garage band in high school. And all those moments sort of led up to me going to college because I really wanted to do orchestral music for film. And then you fast forward even further. I'm out of college looking for work. And then Mick just happens to post something on Twitter that he's looking for a vocalist. Insert wife. And that's actually how we got introduced to Mick to begin with, was he needed a vocalist, not someone like me to help. So then we just ended up joining him for what ended up being Orchid's theme.
We never would have imagined that we would have gotten picked for the project. You were like, oh, hey, Mick's just posted on Twitter that he needs a female vocalist. Like, you should post your demo reel. And I was like, okay, but I didn't think anything would come of it. You know, we had never worked on video games before or anything like that.
I remember some of the music he sent me, he had Ali singing over it, but it was more like sort of alto, soprano, like ethereal vocals and stuff like that. And honestly, because I'd screwed around for 6 weeks and had nothing to show for it, I knew I'd spoken to Casey and he mentioned that his partner could sing. And I was like, I'm not interested in you right now. I just want to talk to your wife. Right? I just want her to do this thing for me because I think it'd be cool. And I remember getting them on Skype and sort of like talking them through this idea. And, you know, she'd never done anything like it before either. And we all, the three of us, just sort of found our way through it, I think.
He needed lyrics written for Orchid's theme because he knew whoever he hired, he wanted the vocalist as a woman to voice the character. He really wanted Orchid to feel like a strong woman was behind it, which was very exciting. And also just gave us a lot of trust and respect moving forward with him on the project.
The part about that story is I think I had about 7 weeks to do Orchid. Man, I screwed around for about 6 weeks with nothing. And everybody started getting really nervous. And I was like, it's going to work. Trust me, it'll work. And then I'd walk away going, I don't think it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to work. And then the moment we got Ali involved and they wrote some really great lyrics and I started putting it in, man, it came together in like 3 or 4 days.
Like me personally, as a woman, you know, it gave me a lot of confidence working with them. Because, you know, he was talking about how he wanted women to be able to pick up Orchid as a playable character and find themselves in her instead of feeling icky. And he was like, you know, I want people to feel comfortable with her. You know, I don't want people to feel like she's being over-sexualized or used or, you know, is a tool of, you know, for the male gaze. So we definitely wanted the music to reflect that. Him having that conversation with me definitely helped me to understand where the lyrics needed to go. Like, had we not had that conversation early on, one, who knows, I might not have felt as comfortable as I was with writing all the lyrics that I was. But yeah, I also just had a very, very clear idea of who the character was because of that conversation. So
I don't know if you can use this part, but one of my favorite stories from Orchid when we first got started is we had recorded all the chorus parts, we recorded all the verse parts, and at the end he was looking for some of those like little producer, I forget what you would call it. Yeah, ear candy. So essentially producers like to put little ear candy in between these spaces where there's no vocals. If there's something that you can fit in, he essentially had Ali record a bunch of takes of the word bitch. And
just to grunge it up a little bit.
It wasn't just like, you know, like nasty, like bitch, you know, it was like musical, like bitch, that bitch. Like it was musical and rhythmic, but Microsoft had no idea. And even after the game was published and the soundtrack was out, they found out and they were like, can we get an edited version of this? And it was essentially like, nah, it's kind of done.
So I make it my active duty to get in trouble on every project. I just think you should be pushing boundaries, right? I just really think that's kind of how you should be doing it, right? Whenever you're doing a vocal session with a vocalist, it's always really important to do what we call ad-libs, right? And ad-libs are just where it's like, we've done the song, we've recorded all the cool bits, let's just have some fun, right? So I got Ali to do a bunch of these like, yeah. Just different bits of singing, right? Like, turn it up. Here's some woos.
Woo! Yeah.
And I said to Ali, hey, wouldn't it be cool? Could you just give me like 11 bitches, right? So she recorded 11.
Bitch.
Right. That over and over again. I think like often that's where a lot of the character of these tracks come from, these ad-lib tracks.
Come and get it.
Right. I remember that sort of stuff kind of gets in there.
Come on, kick it.
Right, you'll know that from the tracks. That one's in there. So, like, that wouldn't have been written. Nobody would have written that down and saying, okay, at this point, say, come on, kick it. But she just did that in the ad-lib section, and then...
Come on, kick it.
All of a sudden, you got this cool little sonic ID that you can throw in there. Both Jed and I were put in contact with folks at Rareware. I really wanted to use that as an opportunity to chat to Robin as well. And he was great. He sent me all of the original recording sessions that they did for Killer Instinct. And I actually, when I was prepping for this, I managed to make sure that I was going to get a bunch of these because I feel that they're really cool to listen to. And so the stuff that you hear in Orchid's theme, that's Faye, who was the original vocalist. That's her stuff. So I have some of the ones here that I processed.
Whoa!
This is her original vocals from back in like 92.
Whoa! Oh, yeah! Oh, no, baby! Oh, yeah!
How many times have you heard that before, right? Like, for me, going back through and listening to this and hearing that,
Oh, yeah!
I was like, oh my God, that's like, there's so many memories that have come back from that session, right?
Yeah!
So the radio bits you're referring to, I did processing on Faye's voice, which is this stuff. Now, you can't really tell what she's saying there, but it's just sort of random bits and pieces that I took from the recording session, stuff that wasn't used in the original song. And I just did this sort of like war radio, like a military radio type processing on them. So that's there.
We really didn't hear it until it was done. Okay, and then at that point we heard, I guess, what would have been like a soundtrack cut. When we were just throwing a bunch of verses at them, like we didn't know that all of them were going to be used. We didn't know how many would be used, how much of it would be trashed. And I think he used just about everything that we sent him. So that way it would feel more dynamic when you're playing with the character, that there's so much song to listen to. It stands on its own, even outside of Killer Instinct. It does feel like a song that you could hear out in the world, outside of the video game world. When we heard it all together at once, I was like, oh my God, how did he make me sound so good? I remember just being kind of blown away because everything sounded so punchy. Everything sounded so clean. And I remember he asked me to re-record a few vocals, and he wanted me to like really over-enunciate and like push energy. And it feels weird, when you're in front of the mic, like really over-enunciating every syllable. It feels strange. But when you hear everything together in a mix, everything sounds so clear and concise, and it really does give so much more energy to what you're listening to. And it's something that I've actually taken forward into other projects, because it's like now if there's ever a project that requires that much energy, I know how to deliver that. It was all because of a strange suggestion that really, really worked out. And it was smart of him to think of that.
I don't want to say he's anti this, but he's never been a big fan of just taking the game music, ripping it out of the game, stitching it together, and then calling that a soundtrack release. He's always been very much about a handcrafted approach to each track that he releases to people. It's like, it's an experience. Like, you have the game. Now this is the soundtrack experience. It's not the music just ripped out and put together and then given to you. Like the borings that he has, that's what they're called in Killer Instinct. The bridge sections, if you stop moving, you get a different section that's sort of hidden in the game engine. And he'll use those as bridges. Sometimes, like in Maya's track, he completely remixed, I think, the entire thing. It was a totally different experience from what you get into the game and then what you get into the soundtrack. Not completely different track, but just a very different experience.
Yeah, different production.
Yeah, so
it feels like a different song, but it's not.
I definitely took that. So whenever I work on my own projects now, I always think about what is the soundtrack experience going to be like outside of the game, and how can I make that the best for the fans? And I'm really thankful that he's always had that forward thinking. It's not just, I'm stressed out now, I have to write this song, I have to make the fans happy. It's, you have all these other things that you're carrying on your shoulders when you're doing this, and he just carried it like a champ.
Leaving your soul twisted up in my close fist. Take notice.
In the trailer, they wanted to sell this idea about TJ Combo's comeback story, right? And so it's like, well, we had this sort of narrative piece that was written for the actor who played TJ Combo to read, and it was just sort of him talking about coming back, and that was going to be the theme of the trailer. I just started playing on piano the Killer Instinct theme underneath that. So it was this idea that there was like, some sort of noble superhero character trailer, right? But then when he kicks up and he's like really come back, we have this like electronic section at the end. And I feel this is where I was starting to experiment with the sound of whatever that was going to be, right? So that's when it breaks into this. That's the first little hints of what TJ's theme might be styled like. Interestingly, though, I really needed a awesome vocalist, and it's weird. Really good vocalists are actually really hard to find. Like there's 96% of vocalists, and there's like 4% who are actually really, 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 really good. And reaching out to try and find a rapper, a lyricist, was really hard. And I sent out feelers to a bunch of people, and I got all these like demos and things through, but nothing worked, right? Nothing worked at all. We needed something that really fit TJ Combo as a character in the stage of life that he was in. So he was like an older guy, he's like 40 plus, and he's, he's had a difficult past, and he, left the boxing game in disgrace, and he worked on himself, and he's come back, right? So this isn't like a young, arrogant 18-year-old. This is somebody who's mature and thoughtful and surgical and really thinks about things. And I was sitting down with my laptop watching Evo, and this opening song came on. It had this track that was like Amiga there, and he was like rapping away. And I was like, oh my God, that voice is just perfect, right?
Taskmaster, my blast to give you stress fractures. Web sling, kick slash, and I hit that X factor. About to go for that win. Feel a lot of power over my skin. Got me mad and glowing up red with all these combos up in my head. And I can to the block.
Within 60 seconds, I had an email off to Jarrell. Like, instantly, straight away after him, trying to find out, hey man, could you do this thing? I'm doing Killer Instinct Season 2. We're working on TJ Combo. I really need you to be the rapper for this.
Once I passed the audition and Mick and I started working together, we basically had 2 weeks to come up with a song for TJ Combo. And it was great. It was mostly through Skype and Dropbox, and, Mick sending me different pieces and elements, and me staying sharp as a writer, making sure that, I'm hitting emotionally and lyrically, staying in line with his vision.
What's great about his stuff was that his lyrics are just surgical, man. He's an absolute lyricist. And that, I feel above all else with a rapper is the most important thing. It's what you're saying, right? It's the words that are coming out of your mouth. How you're saying it, great, but it's what you're saying is the message, right?
Well, his comeback story and the fact that he had cybernetic implants in his body and he ripped them out because he wanted to be more of a pure boxer. And he's, fighting raptors and cyborgs and aliens from other planets. But even in the midst of that, he still had enough self-respect for his comeback that he didn't want any cybernetic advantages and still relied on his skills and his self-belief. And so I really wanted to capture that in the music, and I wanted to capture his confidence. It was more just focused on the reason why TJ Combo is in season 2, the reason why he's stepping up again in these matches, and what's his self-belief, what's his motivation. And so discovering that, even going back to Killer Instinct 1 and just really absorbing his story arc, and not just absorbing his story arc, but absorbing what it means and what he meant to fans of Killer Instinct, and kind of looking into what are people excited about when they hear of TJ Combo? What do they expect out of him as a character, not just his moves and stuff, and just trying to bottle all that up in lyrics, in verses. It was fun.
So we started with some that were going to be more like a serious hip hop take, right? Something that was kind of heavy and groovy. And it was fun, playing these really big beats. And I know Amiga was really into it and things at that time, but throwing that into a gameplay, it just didn't fit. It just didn't feel like it fit the level. I would have loved to have done some tracks like that, but it didn't fit the game. And that's always the most important thing you got to come back to is whatever you're doing has to fit the game at the end of the day.
And then halfway through those 2 weeks, he said, you know what? I like the direction, but I feel like we can do better.
There's a hidden story to all of that, right? And that's what stress on a project under a deadline actually means. And what it actually means is that at some point you're going to be faced with a decision. And that decision is going to be looking at what you're doing and understanding that it does not work, right? It just doesn't work. Sounds cool, because Amiga's into it, but it just doesn't fit the game. And you're faced with this decision. Do we scrap everything that we've done and try to find something new, knowing that there is very little time left? Or do we just keep doing what we're doing and just hope for the best? And there's been times in the past where I've been forced to focus on the thing that wasn't working and just hope for the best. And it just doesn't hit right. It comes out and it just doesn't land. And everybody knows, the fan base knows. They're like, I know that theme does not work. It just doesn't feel right. It's just not there, right? I'm a big fan, even though it is very stressful and it does put a lot of pressure on everybody that you're working with. I am a fan of throwing it out at the last minute and trying again, because if we didn't do that, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation about TJ Combo's theme, right? If we'd been the sensible ones and just stuck with the boring thing that wasn't working, nobody probably would have cared. It would have come and gone and that's it. But I feel it's when you kind of, roll up your sleeves and get some dirt under your nails and stay up late and crunch away at things, that's when that good stuff can come out. It doesn't always happen, but it can come out. And in this case, I feel it definitely came together.
It was great. What we were creating was great. But I feel like in Mick's head, there's another level of magic, that magic that really takes a song over the top. And it's not just a great track or a great beat with someone flowing on it. It speaks to the genius of Mick Gordon, how he could just say, hey, I'm liking it, but I feel like we can go deeper. We can dive deeper. We can make something a little more magical. And so we actually, in our 2-week crunch time, halfway in the middle of that, Mick switches up, and what we know today as I'm Back to Rise, TJ Combo's theme song, we did in about a week.
I think, honestly, to this day, that's still my favorite track. I remember he even told a story once because, back then they would play most of their drum tracks from an actual 808 or a 909, and they would do it by hand. And he said it just felt too rigid what he was doing. So he went back and referenced like an older hip hop song so he could have it slightly off beat. And I think he said he drug it in so he could see the transients and how they lined up. Mm-hmm. And he said he was dragging his own audio around so it would be slightly off beat, which was a little bit more authentic to the actual hip hop around that time.
Yeah.
Interestingly, like proper, 80s hip hop stuff was primarily like sampled drum tracks from 70s funk records, and somebody would find an old record in a record store, and they'd listen through the whole record, and there'd be one little section in there where all the music stopped and the drummer would just play one or two bars, right? And then they'd sample that. They'd literally like record it and then try and trim the start and the end time and then loop that on the old primitive technology that they had at the time. So what you've got there is timing issues, right? So it's not going to be in time perfectly because there was a real drummer playing it, but oftentimes the loop itself wasn't quite correct or it wasn't quantized correct. But what was cool about it is that it had a feel. It had like a bit of a funk sort of groove to it, right? It wasn't so strict. So with TJ Combo's theme, I wanted to bring an element of that across as a sense of authenticity to try and illustrate it here. Here's the drum beat straight. It's like really mechanical, And if we funk it up a bit, it's got a lot more of a swing to it now, right? It's not so perfect. And I made the decision when we were doing this to do that with everything, every synth, every bass part, Jarrell's lyrics, all the drums, everything was a little bit out of time. Now, what happened the moment I did that is it started to feel like a flashy boxer. It started to feel like a boxer that was light and feathered on their feet, and they were kind of moving around the ring. They weren't sort of rigid and ready to fight. It was like, smooth and confident. And that there hit TJ Combo's attitude, right? That was it. If we just take out Amiga's voice, you'll hear all sorts of original Killer Instinct stuff in the background. So I'll solo that little bit there. So I'm just looking for bits to throw in the background behind Amiga's voice, and it's just there. Why not use it, There's other bits and pieces that were like inspired by the bass riffs. I remember TJ Combo's original themes had these incredible bass parts, right? And I remember wanting to kind of bring those back a little bit, but just in a modern way. Yeah, so these little parts here, this is literally rips that I've kind of sampled the way like a hip hop artist would in the 80s. I've literally just sampled bits and pieces from TJ Combo's original theme. It's literally stuff that's just taken from the original theme, just sort of thrown in there, given a new lease of life, And
it's, again, that sort of level of dedication to his craft that makes all these tracks stand out so much. And of course, Omega Sparx kicked ass at delivering all of the lines on that song. It was so good.
It was so great, like finally getting to come in and work on a song that was like put together. And I was like, oh, I can totally see what he's doing here. And this sounds awesome.
Yeah.
And so we got to hear kind of Omega in the final version.
It's cool, but there's nothing there. There is nothing there until you add Amiga's voice. That's everything. And that by itself is just like...
Flashing a star, chilling with cash and cars. Was somewhere lost my passion's hard. Now at the combo gym, getting back my art. With the fury inside, you can't match my spark. So, pull up your guard for a shot at your chest. I got the instinct to do it in this battle with death. This is my time to rise, you can't ride on my steps. I'm gonna win, and it don't matter who challenged me next.
It's just so tight, man. He's like... It's so full, you know what I mean? Like, and it's amazing when you find a really incredible artist like Amiga. All you need to do is just support that artist and make sure you don't screw up. Like, that's my job on this thing, is just to not screw his stuff up. He wrote all the lyrics. He came up with it all. I had a couple of ideas that were so ridiculously stupid, and he didn't even tell me they were stupid ideas. He was like so polite. The other thing that like honestly was a really big thing for us was finding a rapper that had confidence, aggression, but wasn't cheating it through cussing, swearing and stuff, right? Just super clean. Just knock them dead with the lyrics, right? And he just brought that in spades, man. And I feel that's a skill that's really disappeared with modern hip hop, with modern rappers. It's just relying on the words that you're saying too much instead of the message that you're saying that's behind it. So he sent me all of his vocal tracks, right? And I was like, man, this is incredible. You know, I'm listening through to it.
What you got? I want to see how you rock. If you're great or not, want to take my spot. Better train the box.
Just great. And then halfway through, this other rapper appears.
Rock, ready, no, stop, yeah, it's getting tense up over my block. I'm locked in the clinch, I'm about to go off. I was lost.
And I'm like, dude, you can't do that. I don't have the budget for another rapper. Like, you can't just invite people in. Now we got to like get them to sign the contracts and like, oh man, why did you do this? And he was like, why are you freaking out, man? That's me. He's like, I do impressions. That's him. That's his same voice. That is the same guy.
Hit me if you want my chin. It's like granite, keep throwing.
That?
Locked in the clinch, I'm about to go off.
That's the same guy.
I didn't put this pressure on myself, but I'm really personally big into history. And so I really love it when the video game world respects hip hop. And, you know, yeah, they'll use a few, you know, mainstream music artists in, you know, a football game soundtrack or what have you. But to actually pull on the elements of hip hop and use it for, you know, original content for a fighting game, I knew I was a part of history. I wanted to represent. I wanted to do the best I could, you know, not just for this character, but for the fans of the video game and just for the respect level of hip hop, honestly.
It's probably just one of those really great circumstances where, you know, we had a really cool character and we managed to come across Amiga and the timing was really good and all these elements just sort of came together. I feel if we'd done the previous version that I played you, it just wouldn't have turned out the same way. Having something that was more positive in a way, like a comeback positive story, not comeback aggression, but like comeback positive, sort of really sell it. So yeah, it was a great way to kick off season 2.
So I can power through you with no risk, leaving your soul twisted up in my close fist. Right. Take notice, I'm saying it's the coldest, baddest erratic fighter you can face on the foes list. The knockout king to all my opponents. I'm taking every moment to win, baby, I own it. Yeah, I stop the zoning with flurries and combinations, saying you would hate me, cause my skills are way great. I'm back to, let the truth be told. I feel on fire when my passion flows. I'm back to, let the truth be told. I feel on fire when my passion flows. I'm back for my glory.
Well, there's a couple of stories with this one. Number one is that there's 2 different versions. So there's the version that's in the game, and then there's the version that was released on the soundtrack. And they are different. They are very, very, very quite different. And the story behind that is that I lost the original session. And the way that occurred was that when I was doing the Killer Instinct Season 2 soundtrack, the Maya component, I was in Austin, Texas, and I was working on a laptop, and I was in a hotel room. I was working on a different project, and I did not have access to the original session, all of it. I only had parts. I had the parts that Ali had recorded. I had some flute stuff. So I had to rebuild the track just to make the deadline. And that's why the version on this soundtrack is different. Interestingly, recently I was digging through some archival stuff and I found the original session. They sent me concept art for her stage before they sent me concept art for her character. The stage itself was this like incredible paradise jungle, right? With this cool snake and these, you know, birds off in the distance and these wonderful trees and things like that. And just this sense of beauty there was really strong in the level. So I feel this one was inspired more by the level than anything else.
Interestingly enough, we were actually working on 3 of those tracks at the same time, kind of. It was Maya, background vocals for TJ Combo, and The Way You Move, which was the soundtrack exclusive. So we were doing kind of all those 3 bundled together. But Maya was definitely the project at the forefront of all of our minds because I think it had the tightest deadline, needed to be done first.
And you were the featured vocalist.
And I was the featured vocalist. Yeah. And I remember how Mick pitched it to me. He said, I want it to be like an alley choir. Like, I just want your voice everywhere in the song. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot of pressure, but also really exciting. We had a chorus idea, but we needed to create our own language from the ground up. So we started thinking about phonetically what sounds like Maya. And so we just started sketching things out, improving, trying different things, and then presented our ideas to Mick and went with it. And then everything else outside of the chorus was completely improv. The language that was built off of the chorus I just had to keep the phonetics in mind and then kind of improv all kinds of melodies and harmonies and chants and warrior calls and jungle sounds, monkey sounds, everything.
And it's interesting when you're coming with phonetic-based lyrics, you come up with stuff that makes sense musically. So you're not trying to say certain words in there because sometimes words don't fit musically that well. Complicated words don't always fit nicely with bars. But when you don't have that restriction of a language, you're kind of free to come up with something that's phonetically interesting.
My favorite section, I was so glad he used it, the boring section, when she's not moving and everything gets kind of quiet and spaced out and really lovely. Like that whole section was improv and it was my favorite part. And I was like, I really hope he uses that. Like there's not really a lot of energy behind it. It's kind of sweet and like maybe even a little serene.
She was the protector of nature, right? I think it's okay to be have a little bit of sweetness inside of you. Plus, I believe from the get-go, we knew we were going to have to help make up a language of sorts. And I believed the brief from the beginning is more of a love language, like French or Korean, something a little bit softer. Even though we do have
but also still somewhat tribal with like hard consonants too.
Yeah, so which is why we have like the kudobe kave la. It's not like too, maybe Germanic or English in its enunciation. It's still a little soft with a little bit of point to it. When we worked with Orchid, we were still living in Tennessee at the time. We live in LA now, and obviously Mick is still in Australia. So usually what I would expect is that he would give us directions and he would listen in live as if he were in the studio on the other side of the booth. But that's not what happened. And that's the part that really blows me away, is that he really did trust us, as Ali was talking about, so much more than I thought we would be getting that early on. And having now had to do that myself, you realize that you just kind of have to keep working because you have deadlines and you can't, I hate to say it, but you can't babysit someone, even though that's not really what's happening. Usually when a vocal producer's in there, they're just trying to get the best out of the vocalist. Like, oh, don't breathe there, breathe here. Or let's try pronouncing it this way to help the slight rhyme work a little bit better. But no, there was almost none of that. It was just, like you said, Dropbox files. We would do takes. I'd send it to him. He'd be right there, listen to it, give us notes, or say, that's great. And then we would move on from there. It was a lot of Dropbox and a lot of working whenever we're both awake.
Obviously, if you're working with good collaborators, it's easy, right? If you're working with interesting musicians, they're going to bring their own language and voice to the project anyway. So you can just sort of lean on them a little bit. They're going to bring something interesting to it. The other thing is, I think, understanding what the word collaboration actually means. Collaboration isn't a dictatorship. A collaboration isn't where I order people to do things, right? That's not a collaboration. A collaboration is acknowledging that you have this whole, right? This whole thing that you need to fill out. And that my parts are only going to fill out so much, right? And when you bring somebody else in, they're going to fill out another part. They're not filling out a part that I've dictated, right? They're going to fill out a part that they're going to bring, their own voice to. They're going to interpret it in their own way. And so when you're working with interesting people, they're going to come up with interesting stuff that you would have never come up with before. I wouldn't have been able to write those lyrics for Amiga. I wouldn't have been able to write these lyrics for Ali to sing. That's stuff that she came up with. So when you do that, I feel you come up with a greater whole. It's not so much of a one-dimensional thing. It's a greater whole.
It was fun. Yeah. I think I still have a notebook full of a bunch of trial and error stuff somewhere that we were just like, does this work? Does this work? Does this work? And I think that's another one where I had like 5% input and Ali and Mick did all the other work. I was basically just there. Like she said, a choir of Ali's. I was the one who was always doing all the comping, putting it together and just blasting a bunch of stuff to Mick. But I remember we were doing like 3 to 4 part harmony in some parts, and we were doing 3 to 4 takes for each harmony. So I would have like 12 to 20 stacks of these mono files of Ali just sitting in my project folders, and just good luck mixing that.
Yeah, and I remember there was a specific sound in the references that he wanted. It was almost sort of like that Bulgarian choir sound where things start to sound a little bit more nasal. And so I was performing a lot of these takes more on the nasal side, less on the breathy side, less on the chest voice side. And it creates like a really interesting sound when you layer all of them together. And it sounds completely different from how my voice would from another project. So that was really interesting as well.
I'd gone through a whole bunch of different themes for Maya's sort of vibe, and I couldn't get away from Robin's original riff that he had there. But I didn't want it so aggressive. The original one's actually got this sort of hard driving, dance thing. And I just didn't feel that fit the sort of beauty of the new level. So for this time around, I wanted to go with more I don't know what you'd call it, a fun calypso vibe. It still drives hard, but it's got this sort of fun carnival vibe to it. I think a lot of that came from these strumming guitars. Once I put that in there, it feels a bit more like a party vibe, But same again, you can't just ship that. It's cool by itself, but it's not interesting, you know what I mean? It's not until you start throwing vocal stuff in there that I feel it gave it the identity, especially as part of a Killer Instinct game. So there's lots of other interesting vocal stuff in here that's away from the chorus. There's all this cool stuff. And that's all Ali as well. It's just where I gave Ali some chords to sing over, and she just improvised. She just come up with melodies and really breathy, interesting, sort of soft sounding things just to get this idea of beauty across. And of course, I have to be completely honest here and talk about the inspirations behind that. My first CD was Killer Instinct, Killer Cuts, right? But the first CD I ever bought with my pocket money as a kid was the Mortal Kombat movie soundtrack. There's an orbital track on there. It's just full of these really beautiful vocals, which I know more about now. But at the time, I was like, man, that was just like heaven. Whenever I think of heaven, I imagine that track, right? Especially those vocals. So when Ali was doing this stuff, it was really just to try and nail that breathy Mortal Kombat vibe. And so that's it. And what's amazing about the human voice is it's such a real gateway into somebody's soul, especially in a musical context. The moment you put voice in there, it gives something for people to relate to. If I muted Ali's voice there, you can hear in the background there's not a lot going on. It's just stuff that's in the background. But Ali by herself, you can listen to. It adds that dimension that it needs. Just lovely. And to me, that was selling this idea of this beautiful paradise jungle sort of setup, right? The chorus, I'd come up with some chords for them to sing around, but they came up with the lyrics, and it's totally just made up language. And people have been deciding and trying to find out for a long time what the lyrics are. It's just made up stuff. It's like gobbledygook, phonetic-based language, is it? And it's just the way Ali sung it, and we recorded it a bunch of times and layered it on top of each other so it sounds like an Ali choir. It just has this kind of vibe that's I don't know, it kind of fits. And same again, once you have something like that, a little nugget of theme, you can just throw that in and that's honestly 90% of the track. My job again then just becomes filling out the background stuff and not getting in the way. Cinder's theme, Trailblazers, is probably my favorite piece of music from the original games. So when it came time to do Cinder's new theme, it was like, well, there was no question. It absolutely has to be a modern version of Trailblazer. So that was the obvious thing. Once you've nailed that, then it's like, well, how do you do that modern version, right? Part of it is production techniques and just technology that we have now that maybe Robin didn't have, at the time. But a big part of it too is just sort of trying to identify what made that one pretty special. And I remember starting that level on the arcade machine, and as the camera pans down, you'd have like that pick scrape, right? I remember spending way too long trying to get that correct. I couldn't nail it correctly. I ended up having to just sample it from the original recording session because, yeah. And then once I had that, it kind of actually started to feel like Cinder's track. But a big thing that really made Cinder's original piece of music was that 6/8 time signature and the forward momentum that track has. It's a very interesting rhythm that has this sort of... It's a groove, right? It's a solid groove. And... it's a very specific groove at a very specific tempo that I borrowed again to use on BFG Division. BFG Division's at exactly the same tempo as Cinder's track, and it was so I could nail that same sort of groove at the same time. So once we had that, it was really just like, trying to, as I said, nail the production aspect of it, trying to make the drums kind of loud and modern, and a lot of the guitars were kind of like chunky. Same sort of thing. And once you start getting that, it starts to, feel like Cinder's track. We're kind of getting there, all right? I was working on a couple of things and I noticed on YouTube this like really incredible, miraculous thing that started happening, which was people started making covers of the music that we were doing for Killer Instinct. And I was like, what the hell? That's just incredible, right? That there's people out there that would take the time to learn the pieces of music and then play them and then film them and make videos of themselves and put them out there. And one of the ones that everybody was looking forward to was this guy called LittleVMills. He'd done other video game sort of covers, which I'd never noticed before, and it wasn't until he started covering a couple of the songs that I'd done for Killer Instinct, I was like, wow, this is cool.
I can't remember how many I'd done at that point, but I'd done like 2 or 3 at that point. And on one of the videos, I don't know which one it was, Mick commented and just was like, all right, do Folgler's theme. And I'm like, okay. So I did. And I had an 8-string guitar, so I was able to actually replicate it. And I was like, all right, let me try and play this industrial Fear Factory-esque type crazy with like maybe 2 or 3 years of experience of a guitar under my belt at that point, maybe 3 at that point. I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to try doing that. And then I actually remember filming for that video. I had this comically oversized guitar pick too. It was just massive. So I filmed with this stupid giant pick too, just to be dumb, just to be cheeky. Some time goes by and I am making dinner and checking my phone, as you do, as we're all addicted. And, one hand on the pan, one hand on the phone. And I got a quick little notification on Twitter. And Mick tweets directly at me and goes, yo, you wanna do Cinder's theme? And I remember almost dropping the pan I was cooking, and because I had it elevated, and I think I was like shaking something around. And I think I actually let go for a second and grabbed it. And I was like, not a DM, a tweet, a public tweet, just tweeted directly at me. And I'm just like, From there, obviously I said yes. And then we started working. And it was just one of those things of like, yeah, I really like this soundtrack. I want to do my own version of it and play around with it a little bit and do my own cover of it.
We had no time, again, as per normal. And I had the track like 90% done. And I sent him an email and I was like, man, I'd love you to play some solos over this thing. What can you do? And he was like, dude, I've got a really busy weekend. I've got lots of gigs playing at like rodeos or whatever they do in Calgary. And so in between gigs, he just loaded up the track that I did and sent me like millions of solos. And I have like all of these tracks of solos. He just did take after take after take after take after take. All this stuff is like solos from LittleVMills. And there's a lot of stuff in here that I just didn't end up using because we just couldn't find a spot for it. But he's got everything from like these crazy Floyd Rosey things. He's got like bluesy versions. He just sort of geeked out like crazy.
Mick sent over the files, gave me the rundown. We had like a quick little Skype call. It was just like da 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 da, this, and I'm like, and he just explained everything perfectly of what I needed to do. And I was like, okay, great. He gave me the broad outlines. I'm sure you know from talking with him how he has his songs arranged are very interesting. He basically has it in like 4-bar chunks. So it's like 4 bars of a pattern and then like 4 bars of nothing. So trying to listen to it back to back, like from start to end, is actually very jarring because it's like music silence. You have to just kind of guess which parts are going where. But basically it's like, okay, so over like this section and this section and this section, do some stuff. Maybe this part over here, do some stuff. And I remember him going like, I know it's probably really hard to like parse parts together because it's such a weird format. And then I think I pretty much dropped whatever I was doing at that current, whatever I was practicing or rehearsing for or doing. And I was just like, okay, grabbed a guitar and I just kind of let her rip. Pretty much, I wouldn't say, not necessarily one take, but the first drafts of everything I sent to him ended up being the final products in a lot of cases, including all the guitar tones and stuff. It was so simple that I didn't even like, we didn't have to discuss the guitar tone or anything like that. It was like, I just did some stuff. I'm like, okay, well, I'll try some whammy stuff because I mean, it's shreddy. We gotta do some whammy stuff. I'm not much of a lead player, which is kind of funny considering I got that gig. But doing all the dive bombs and stuff, threw like a cool like 80s chorus effect on some of the guitar stuff, and even he was like, oh yeah, it's great, perfect, I love that. And it just no pressure, but it was just like, okay, let's just do it.
My job then was just to like pick out the bits from here that I felt sort of complemented the track in the nicest possible way, and once we did that, I kind of comped together this cacophony of LittleVMills, which appears in all sorts of places. It's just this like pure rock fest, right? So yeah, I ended up just sort of putting those little bits in there and it just sold the track, which was really, really cool.
So the big one is the guitar solo when you stop playing. That's probably the most noticeable thing that I did. It was funny because the part I really wanted to hear, I just had to stop playing. Like it was like, okay, this is hyping me up. All right, but stop. Oh, there it is. Ooh.
The only other thing that I felt that it was a difficult decision I had to make myself, but it just felt right. And it was to expand on the original melody a little bit. The original melody, I felt when it came in the track, it just felt like it wanted to have a second part to it. I could just always hear it in my head. I don't know where it came from or why, but whenever I heard the first part of the melody, that's where the original one ends. But I always, even as a kid, heard a second part to it. So I did that on top just to kind of extend it a little bit further. It's just like I felt like that back in the 90s they had it there, but it was cut short. And I just wanted to kind of fill the next bit out, like finish the story, I guess you'd say. So in the original Killer Instinct Cinder theme, there's this section at the end, the low health section. It was the only piece of like interactive music they could do at the time, right? It's changed to some different music during the low health section. And my nostalgia, because of the tenseness that would happen during that phase, my nostalgia told me that section speeds up, right? And then when I listened back to it, I realized it doesn't. It's just that I had imprinted in my memory that it speeds up because of the tenseness that I'd feel, the pressure, the anxiety that I feel from playing the game. I'd be like, oh man, this is getting intense. I thought that the music was speeding up when it actually wasn't. So, given an opportunity to do this version, I wanted that section to come back, but to speed up, right? To actually kind of tick that box that my nostalgia was telling me was there. So the bit I'm talking about is these cool arpeggios that lead into that section. So that's how it goes. And then each time it plays, it gets a little bit higher and a little bit quicker. And it just keeps going and going and going, et cetera, et cetera. But when we put that into the game, it felt so good that all of a sudden you were down to this low health moment and the music just got faster and faster and faster. And you got more and more anxious. And I don't know, it kind of worked.
And yeah, I remember loving it. And then of course I'm like, okay, well, what's the internet think? And I remember pulling up like Maximilian and being like, what? And he's like, ooh, I love this. And I'm just like, okay, all right, everyone's, I think it was more of like a sigh of relief. I'm like, oh, thank God, it sounds good. Okay, whew. Okay, I didn't screw up the gig. All right, that's good.
I mentioned before about how when I started on season 2 that they sent me this document that had pretty much every character that we were going to have for season 2 in this document. I'm looking at Maya and I'm looking at TJ Combo and I'm looking at Arya and I'm looking at Hisako and everything is cool. Like there's inspiration in all of those. And then I get to this character that's nothing but a rock statue, right? I remember just pulling my hair out thinking, what the hell does a rock sound like, right?
We were discussing upcoming characters and that he was going to need my help on this one in particular. So the way we started talking about it is like, so the next character is like a rock or something. I don't know how we're going to get inspired by a rock. You know, it wasn't, you know, that's not verbatim, but that was sort of like the ground base motivation for this track was it's a rock guy. I don't know, man. And then I remember thinking like, geez. And he was like, well, if you want to pitch me some ideas, go ahead. And it was the first time I got to like pitch like how the track's going to be. Nothing landed. That's fine. I still had, you know, that stress of trying it for the first time. And then I remember in the process of pitching to him, I was like, no, it can't be this because of this. No, that won't work because of this. And then all of a sudden, when you think that he was uninspired and unmotivated to do something, no, he still wants to please the fans and he still wants to do a good job. It still has his name on it. Never have I seen Mick just try to can it or phone it in. And then all of a sudden the light bulb went off in one of our Skype calls. And I remember him being like, well, he's Greek. Let's use some Greek mythology. I think if we're sticking with songs, sort of the popular thing for that area maybe is like power metal and progressive metal. Let's do like a power progressive metal track. And that's sort of where like this big epic came from. And that's sort of how it started.
One of the cool things was that he's a golem. He's like a Greek golem. And whenever they say Greek or whatever, a word means some sort of part of the world, I'm like getting ideas straight away. That was always said, there's going to be some sort of Greek influence there, right? We're going to have some sort of Greekness to it, I guess. And then the second part of it was that if you find that what you're looking at isn't inspiring, you just got to look a little bit further. And when they sent me concept art of his stage, I was just blown away. I was like, wow, this is cool. This looks exactly like those classic, like progressive rock album covers from like the 70s and 80s, you know, like bands like Yes and Asia and stuff like that, where they'd have these like really crazy, like awesome fantasy science fiction inspired album covers. And I was like, well, there must be something there then we might be able to do like some sort of progressive rock thing with Greek influences. And once you get to that, you feel like you're kind of starting to uncover the picture. I always feel that this job is like a musical archaeologist in a way. It's like the answer is already there. It's just your job's to like spend hours with a brush just carefully sort of uncovering it. And little bits and pieces like that allow you to kind of, you know, find a little bit here and a little bit there and you start uncovering this picture. The trouble is, once I hit that sort of idea, it's really difficult to stop. And the idea of having this big prog rock track needed a choir, and I needed a Greek choir. And I only had about 2 weeks and very little money and very little budget, and I needed a Greek choir. And when I hit onto an idea like that, I'm like, no, it's very stubborn. Like, then we absolutely have to do this. I know we've got 2 weeks and there's no money, but how do we do a Greek choir, right? I reached out to a buddy of mine named Panos, who's a Greek guy, and he and his family were musicians. And I reached out to him and I spoke to him about the track. And I said, like, this Greek golem, I want to do a Greek choir. Can you write me some Greek lyrics that sort of summarize what this golem might be used for? And so we talked about this idea of having him like chant words about war and, battle and all this sort of thing. And he came up with these translations for me and some timings, which they sent me.
Μάχη, πόλεμος, νίκη, πόνος, δίκη, πόλεμος, τρόμος παντού.
So he wrote that, right? Here's his lyrics based on a rhythm that I sent him. Once I had that, it's like, well, how do we make a choir, right? And I looked around and I go, well, what have we got? We've got Iron Galaxy and we've got Microsoft. Surely there's a bunch of employees at those two companies, right? What happens if I just take the recording that Panos sent me and I gave it to Iron Galaxy and Microsoft and I said, can you over one day bring in each member of the team and ask them to record their best singing voice versions of those lyrics? And thankfully they did, which was great. So what I ended up with was 461 individual recordings of individual people saying those lyrics. I'll play you a couple.
Mahi! Polemos!
Right, so that's one person. This is Iron Galaxy. I don't know who these people are. They didn't label who they were. Here's another one.
Mahi! Polemos!
All right, and here's a third one.
Mahi! Polemos!
So we're getting lots of different voices saying the same thing. I got a bunch of people at Microsoft to record as a group together. And this sounds different to when you're recording just individual people if you have a group chanting it together.
Mahi! Polemos! Niki! Polemos!
So you can hear the Microsoft ones, they were a little bit more subdued, but the Iron Galaxy ones, they really got into it.
I recorded my roommates at the time.
All of us got together.
We were doing it. He had his friend in Greece that helped him write that part. Mm-hmm. He had a bunch of his drunk friends and himself recording on like some like Tascam recorder or something. And it was so out of time.
Yeah, I do remember that actually. I had a little recorder around and I carried it around to some friends and things, but I don't remember those recordings coming out that well. Oh, I actually found them. Here we go. Men Drunk Shouts. Here we go. Let's try this.
Μάχη, πόλεμος, νίκη, πόνος, δίκη, πόλεμος.
Right, you can hear things are starting to get a little bit slurred there.
Polemos, niki, ponos.
I think it sounded great at the time though. Then I took many hours out of my life to layer these 460 odd voices on top of each other. And what we ended up with was the choir.
Polemos, niki, ponos, niki, polemos, tromos, panu.
That's how we made a choir in 2 weeks with no money.
And then insert guitar. So he had written all this stuff out, given me the MIDI. And I remember we were just going through either sampled instruments or live instruments because we had like all kinds of Greek instruments that we were playing in live and sending over the data. My guitar, I was doing DI. I was miking the actual electric guitar and doing a piezo pickup for him to have. I was doing ukulele. There was mandolin. There was like banjo. There was so many stringed instruments just to have this big, epic, organic choir. It didn't want to just be just like distortion guitar. There was a lot of acoustic instruments. I remember him telling me the story of like how dense that mixing session had become and feeling like he had just maybe asked for too much.
So Casey did a bunch of the additional orchestra stuff. So programming in musical terms doesn't mean like computer programming. Programming is considered to be like MIDI programming of fake instruments, right? So again, because we didn't have any budget, I needed Casey to program some orchestral parts. So Casey built these like brass sections, which you remember from the track. And then say string sections. And then that all gets built into the track with the guitars and all the other bits and lay it up so we get this sort of... It just makes it feel like that big prog rock vibe that we were going for, you know? I remember thinking like this is going to be one of the most difficult ones that we do because it's just a rock creature. But if we nail it, it's going to be cool, you know? So, and it was great once we found it. I remember I was playing around with like really low-tuned guitars as well, which kind of really summarized him as a character. Just that slow, lumbering sort of vibe. I can imagine that's how like a rock creature would move, you know? When I jumped on to do season 2, from memory, a document was sent over that had what they anticipate the characters to be. And from memory, I think every character turned out to be the way it was in that document, which is rare with games. Often things change so much. So I remember seeing in that document Hisako, and she was this sort of character that was inspired by like Japanese ghosts, right? And when I was reading through this document, I remember having this like mental like twitch going, oh, what on earth am I going to do for that? That's going to be tricky, right? Because typically with a fighting game, you have this big layer of aggression that needs to come across. It needs to be punchy, it needs to be loud, it needs to be very aggressive, right? It's probably the best word for it. And when I think of Japanese ghosts, I don't think that. I think ethereal, I think suspenseful, I think mystical, all the things that are kind of opposite to what a fighting game is, right?
We actually recommended our friend Erika for that track. We were like, "Oh, hey Mick, you're looking for, a vocalist for Hisako. You should consider our friend," and kind of connected them from there. And then you kind of managed the session, and then we got together also with Kevin Senzaki as well, and all kind of got together to help plan lyrics.
A lot of the song had already been written, at least musically. And then we got brought on board for the actual voice recording portion. And I think we only had 1 or 2 days to do it. And so there was already a pretty good idea of how they wanted the song to go. We want some metal parts, and we want some parts where like there's like these childlike voices, and maybe we'll like do some screeches and like an opera part and things like that. And so there was already sort of like, it already had like a form, right? And we were just sort of adding the details.
Casey called or texted me and he's like, hey Kevin, we got to do a J-horror ghost for Killer Instinct, and I think we got 36 hours to do it. And I was like, as I was about to say, okay, let me reach out to some professional translators I know, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll be right there. Again, as Erika said, the music pretty much existed. It was pretty much the whole track. The arrangement wasn't quite locked in terms of all, the instrumentation and the mixing, but it was essentially the Hisako track as you hear it. So we had that structure already.
When I think about English versus Japanese, I tend to think of English as a very aggressive language and Japanese as a more like contextual and passive language. But because this is a metal song, a lot of it was like, revenge, things like that. So it's like there's a little bit loss of nuance, I think, compared to if you were writing a ballad or something.
particularly Japanese and English, since they don't have a shared linguistic history, it's a lot harder than saying, doing like English to another Western language, broadly speaking. But again, since we had kind of a locked song, and as Erika was saying, it was sort of aggressive, it was really just trying to find just sort of scattered nouns and verbs, really. There's barely any grammar in it, and you're just trying to create the sort of essence of the character. And again, I think we had concept art for the stage. We didn't really quite know how everything was going to look. So you're trying to, hone in on things that suggest the mood without making these things that are too precise in terms of decision.
Sort of what we understood of Hisako at the time was maybe that she wasn't necessarily like all there. Maybe her memories were clouded and things like that. And so she was less of remembering her past specifically, but more remembering like the feelings of her past, right? And so metal lyrics ended up being a lot more conducive to that, because maybe I'm not able to express like exactly what happened in my past, but I remember that I'm freaking pissed off.
And they recorded her for me, which was really, really great. And they worked on lyrics too. I remember we kind of kicked different ideas back and forth for lyrics. And the lyrics themselves that they'd written didn't quite fit mathematically with the music that we'd written. So what you tend to do when that happens is you just double every line. So if you have 4 lines, but you actually need 8 lines, what you do is you just double those 4. And then Erika brought up this great point, whereas like in some parts of Japanese culture, that is actually a test for ghosts. A ghost isn't able to say the same word twice. And so it kind of fit. It was like a cool little thing that we came across that fit together. A lot of people are familiar with it, but there's parts in here that people won't be familiar with, which is Erika's voice as a soprano. She has this great vibrato on her voice that kind of made it sound really super scary. She's got some of these lovely moments too. Where she's just singing these lovely harmonies in her wonderful soprano voice and just works so well. I remembered I asked her to do some like creepy crying, like you imagine you're in a cemetery at night, and the worst, creepiest sound I think you could hear would be somebody crying on the wind, right? So I asked Erika to do these sort of creepy crying sections. So I remember putting that in, and I finished up the track and I sent it off to Iron Galaxy and Microsoft, and the only bit of feedback that I got was, can you take the crying out? So from the game, I had to remove some of the crying, but then on the soundtrack, I put a lot of the crying back in again. Yeah, for sure. So some of that, honestly, is probably the scales that are picked musically, the musical scales. That's pretty obvious in the breakdown section, which you were talking about before, where it's the Killer Instinct theme, but it's done in a scale that kind of makes it feel a bit too creepy, right? So, I mean, just when it's so seriously happy, it's kind of creepy as well. Right. And I mean, Erika just nailed the voice there. La, 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 la. It's so good, right?
That was either my first or second time where Mick was finally like, oh, you write music too. Give me your help.
Oh, yeah, because you actually helped with that section of the song.
Yeah, that was what I was reminding me.
I forgot about that.
It was either Hisako or Conrad the first time he was like, oh, you're a composer too.
It was Hisako.
Yeah.
Because you definitely helped in that section.
Yeah, and I remember him actually letting me, for the first time ever, help with the music part of it. I wasn't writing anything yet, but I remember doing like all the like kid piano stuff in the bridge section. I was recording a ton of vocals for Erika. I was even doing some sound design vocal stuff and sending it to him, even though he's already very, very good at that. That was sort of my introduction into not just working on a video game, but actually artistically, I guess creatively giving some output, not just input.
With this track, the balance really was trying to find, you know, what's too horror that it's not a fighting game anymore, but what's too fighting game that it's not horror anymore. And that is really difficult to do. So there was a bit of liberties taken and things. And of course, like when you're fighting on the stage and you've got the character itself, and there's so much sort of vibe that comes from the visuals as well, that when you just put the music in there, it's just like that little extra spice on top. So that does sell it a little bit there. There is like a classic sort of like horror type sounds and things. We've got like, you know, our classic sort of like horror-y, scary bits, but most of it is like this sort of 80s synth vibe over modern drum. It's like 80s horror movies, VHS horror movie type vibe. Some of you'd hear on, you remember the old trailers that you'd have on a VHS machine for horror movies and things? Yeah. Underneath that, though, if you put like modern, like punchy drums, which by itself has nothing to do with horror whatsoever, it's just trying to get across the fighting game aspect, and that with like some modern sort of bass stuff. Again, none of that feels like horror, but when you put all of that together, you get a bit of a horror vibe. So it's like each instrument in the band is sort of bringing an influence that was needed, a bit of the fighting game, a bit of the Japanese horror, a bit of the 80s horror. And when all these things work together, that's when you get the cohesive vibe. Yeah, so there was literally no time to do this one. When I say literally, I can see I started working on it on the 6th day of that month, and we delivered it on the 11th day of that month. That's what my files tell me here. So what's that, 4 days? Over that time, yeah, it's like you don't have a lot of time to kind of explore different opportunities and things like what to do. So I remember chatting to the developers and they're like, we have an evil Jago, and he's like a either conjuring or something that's possessed by Gargos, right? Or Gargos. So I was like, well, I remember the original Gargos theme had like that metal riff. So I knew that we'd need some of that sort of corruption aspect from the Gargos theme, right? And I started making like just a really quick modern version of that riff. Which was the original Killer Instinct 2 or Killer Instinct Gold theme for Gargos. Honestly, this was such a speedy rush. I probably wouldn't approach this track the same way as we did it. But once I had that down, it was like, okay, so we've got the Gargos aspect, and now we need to get the Jago aspect in there, right? And it was like, well, I can definitely pull aspects of Jago's theme, so different stems and instruments and things, and I can make them a little bit heavier. So we got like... So that's parts from Jago's theme with a bit more of this like heavy guitar thing over the top. Okay, so now we're sort of starting to get those too. But I had this like throat singing aspect of Jago from the original theme, and I feel if you're going to put voice into a theme, then that theme, by the nature of being there, is also inherited by the character. So that voice becomes Jago's voice. Jago is the throat singer. So if this is a corrupted version of Jago, we can't just put his voice into that one. It needs to be something new, something different. And I reached out to another guy who was like pretty big in the fighting game community, Chris, and I said, dude, look, I've got 4 days to do a theme song. Can you just take these lyrics that I made up for Jago, and can you just do like a metal version of them?
one of my best friends, his name's Fernie Salinas. He had seen Mick make a post about him looking for a metal vocalist to actually try out for an upcoming character track that was unknown at the time. And my background, ever since I was a teenager, I've always really been into metal. Like I've always been in bands, whether I was playing guitar or doing vocals. Like it was always just something I loved doing aside from playing video games. And when Killer Instinct was announced back in 2013, that's when I was like, okay, this is really awesome. So I was already competing in Killer Instinct. And at that moment that Mick posted about looking for a metal vocalist, it was kind of like one of those things where like, I love Killer Instinct. I love metal. What am I going to do about this post? And because of that friend of mine, Fernie, pushing me like, dude, just submit some of your previous audio that you've done and see where it goes from there. I was extremely nervous just because I wasn't even too sure like how it was going to go. And being where I'm from the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, you typically don't have like high expectations for something that great to happen. Well, the next day I was at work, and as I was working, I get a notification on my phone, and it's from Mick. And my eyes just like lit up like, no way did I just get a response from this guy. And I looked it up, and I remember it word for word. It said, "Rad stuff, man. Shoot me a message." And from there, it was just like, I got thrown into the deep end. Like he basically asked me like if I had access to a recording studio, which I did because a really good friend of mine named Charlie Vela, he owns a studio here where I'm from. I went ahead and I relayed the message really quick to him. And I asked him like, hey, I might possibly be able to be in a game I absolutely love ever since I was a kid to even now. I'm not too sure exactly what's going to happen, but is there any way that you can back me up on this? And he was kind of just like confused for a moment, but he was like, yeah, sure, man. Like I got your back.
So he took that stuff and gave me some awesome vocals that I threw in over the top. Which is so funny listening to it, because if you've seen Chris, he looks like somebody that's never said a swear word before, right? He's got these like baby eyes and this innocent smile, and then you put him on a microphone, man, and it's just like out comes this monster, which is exactly what we needed.
I didn't think Mick really expected us to go as hard as we did. And even then some, because as we finished the tracks provided, he was kind of like having fun with it too with us. He went ahead and said like, go ahead and add whatever you'd like as far as like any sort of like vocal patterns, and I'll work around it. I'll work with you guys. And that's exactly what we did. Charlie came up with the actual breakdown part of Herald of Gargos, like, you know, the Taga J go, Taga J go. To hear that come to life later on when Mick provided the music to it was just, man, I really felt like as a team, like we killed it. And it was something that I was incredibly happy with.
So yeah, that's how that one came together. It was kind of quick, kind of thrown together, but I'm kind of happy with it. What's been interesting though is that it's one that sort of has hung around a little bit more. People tend to mention it a bit, and I have no idea why, because it's very quick. I wouldn't do that again. If I had that more time, I probably would have done something else. But sometimes, you know, when you throw something together under pressure like that, it seems to resonate with people because you just go straight to whatever idea works.
The only real music I listened to as a kid was the Killer Instinct soundtrack. So knowing that I had that much love for the original soundtrack, and then to get the opportunity to be in the new soundtrack, like it was one of those things where like, man, I feel like I'm doing this for everybody. The fact that people have it in their top list of like, oh, it's like my number one, number two, whatever it is, right? Just the fact that they actually hear this song within the game itself is something that man, like it's words can't really describe like how it makes me feel.
Here's the sad part about it. While I was doing this, I knew I wouldn't be doing season 3. So there's a big sense when I listen back to it of me kind of like putting a bit of a like sad end to it in there, which I feel you can hear on, especially in the soundtrack or the end of it, how it all ends. It's just sort of, it's like sadness, you know, that we're going to be leaving. And then building up to something more triumphant. So yeah, that's me putting like the yeah, man, there was like 3 years of my life just like, yeah, it was cool, see you later, but this was a lot of fun, you know? So, yeah, listening back to it, that was definitely being channeled there for sure.
I hope you enjoyed watching Composing Instinct. As always, thanks to our patrons for helping make this video happen. If you're looking for more Killer Instinct goodness, consider checking out our other documentaries, Killer Sounds or Fight On, and be sure to subscribe for more fighting game docs in the near future. If you want to support my work directly, consider becoming a patron today at patreon.com/holdbacktoblock. Until next time.